All right, thank you everyone for joining us today for the small business update for relief and the different programs that are out there. Today we have Karen McCumber from the Chamber. She's also a small business owner. She'll introduce herself. Christy Farentell from the Chamber. Megan Blair Valero, who is our expert bookkeeper accountant, will be joining us shortly. And then I'm here to help host and also as a small business owner. So if everybody wants to introduce themselves.
Sure. This is Karen McCumber, and I run the Center for Entrepreneurship at the Chamber. I also am a small business owner. As Jason mentioned, I own the Sherburne Inn here downtown and have had it for 5 years.
Good afternoon. I'm Christy Farentella. I'm the interim president and CEO of the Nantucket Chamber of Commerce, and I'm also a member of the Nantucket Select Board.
Thank you, Christy. Megan's going to join us any minute. The idea behind this is to have a conversation about what programs are out there. What can you apply for? It's very complicated. As we all know, it changes every day, if not every week. So we thought to have something working with NCTV 18 that's live where people can ask questions for people who are doing this all day. I mean, Christy, Karen, Megan, this is all you're doing really 7 days a week, is answering these questions, working with the state, insurance, you name it. People are working, you're working hard on this. So Karen, do you want to start, kind of give us a basic description of the main programs that are out there for small businesses?
Sure, I'm happy to. And I'm going to be throwing out a ton of acronyms here because, of course, it's the government, so that makes perfect sense. Probably just looking at this pretty simply, there are two main programs that we have at our disposal right now. One of them is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, which is EIDL. The other is the Paycheck, this is not an easy one to say, Protection Program Loan, the PPP. So when I refer to those acronyms, that's what we're talking about. And each one of these has two different components, one which is called forgivable or a grant. So in other words, a loan that you don't have to repay. And then a traditional loan, but the terms are usually pretty nice for the small businesses. So if we look at the first, which is the EIDL loan, that has the main purpose of supporting small businesses just to help them stay in operation. So this is actually an SBA direct program. It's something that's existed for a long time. So for example, when a hurricane hits an area, the SBA has used this program previously. In this case, it's obviously quite unique. Generally with the SBA, the eligibility is that the company has to have about 500 or less employees. There are some limits to revenue as well. I think most of the folks joining us today probably fall well within those parameters. And with the EIDL, you can use it for your basic operating expenses, so rent, mortgage, utilities, payroll, all those kinds of things. The application, which I know we're going to put a link up to the direct application, is available up online on the SBA site. You fill out the application, it's really pretty streamlined and quick. At some point, they will let you know that you actually, they have received your application. We can't tell you how long it's going to take for them to actually go through these. I can tell you that I myself started my application the day that they opened this up, which was almost 2.5 weeks ago. I have received a confirmation that they got it. That's the last communication I've had. And with this, the important part is that you can check a box that says that you would like the advance. And what the SBA has realized is because it's going to take them several weeks to get this stuff out and going, you can go ahead and apply for an advance on this loan that is direct deposited into your business bank account. So when you fill out the application, you're going to give your direct deposit information. And this is going to be based on the number of employees you have. That was information we just got yesterday. So $1,000 per employee. And this amount is forgivable. So in other words, this is something that you do not have to pay back. So that's kind of your EIDL program top line. We can go through the terms and all of that if we want to. Then we have the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP. That was part of the CARE Act that just came through Congress. This is very much about trying to make sure that people can retain employees, pay them the right amount, so that they don't have to go on unemployment and or can come off unemployment as quickly as possible. So this one is a little bit unique in that there are only certain ways you can use the money. 75% of the money has to be used for payroll. And if you want this to be forgiven, you have to make sure that you keep a certain amount of employees and pay them a certain amount based on what your history is. And when you apply for this, you will be giving them some payroll history so that they know what that is. 25% can still be used for some things like rent, mortgage, utilities. This one's different. You do have to apply through a bank, and it has to be an SBA approved bank. We do know here locally, for example, Cape Cod 5, Rockland Trust, Bank of America are all SBA approved banks. So if you do any banking with those folks, you should be able to file your application. Christy is also going to put up a link to that application. So you download it, fill it out, and then make sure that you go ahead and apply with the bank. And in this one, again, there's the forgivable component, and there's also the option to get a larger loan with an interest of 1% and payment terms up to 2 years. So that's a real kind of top line overview of what those two loans are. Oh, I think Jason, you're still muted, maybe. Oh.
You would think after doing it all these meetings the last 3 weeks that I would understand to unmute it. Christy, was there anything you wanted to jump in on there on those two programs? Oh, I'm sorry, Megan. Thank you for
Megan's
popping in.
Hi, Megan. No, I think Karen covered it. I posted the links in the live chat. The EIDL is going through the SBA, and as Karen mentioned, the PPP is going through your own lender. So for the actual application, you'll want to check with your bank and with your lender.
Great. I want to let anybody who's watching, we are going to open this up for questions and comments here shortly. So Megan, we just went over the EIDL and the PPP. I don't know if there's anything that you want to add from your what you're doing with what you're seeing with your clients. All right, is she muted?
She's not muted, maybe.
Maybe the audio is not working. We'll get it figured out here. This is our new normal, right? This is how things how they go, meetings.
Technology is a wonderful thing when it works.
Nope, nothing yet there, Megan. Nope, nothing yet. Not sure what's happening there. Dee, can you help her maybe through the chat? Maybe there's something going on. Oh, while we're figuring that out, I'll ask a question. So I'm a small business. I've got 15, 20 employees. In the winter, I've got 6 to 8. You know, I'm very seasonal, right? Majority of my revenue and profit come in 8 to 10 weeks.
Yep.
Which one should I apply for? EIDL, PPP, both? If I have people on unemployment, what should I do?
Yeah, and thank you for reminding me, Jason. So we are strongly recommending that you apply for both. In some cases, you may not be eligible for both, but at least try. You don't have to accept something just because you apply for it, but at least you're going to have the choice. And what we've been told is that the PPP, if you do have employees and you do get that loan, you're probably going to want to take that because a larger portion of that is forgivable. If you do maintain the employees versus the EIDL, where it's a maximum of 10,000 that's forgivable, or 1,000 per employee up to 10 employees. But again, we're just telling everybody, please apply for both. You may need both. What you do want to make sure you do is if you apply for both and get both, you have to use them for different things. So in other words, you can't double dip. You can't say you're using each one of them for payroll for the exact same time frame.
Meg, did you get back on? Let me check to see if her audio is working. Okay.
We can see her.
Yeah, I can see her. Okay, I don't know if her audio is working or not. Now she might be frozen, or she's standing really still.
Oh,
There she is. So I guess my question, you said something about some portion of the PPP is forgivable.
correct.
How does that determine? I'd hate to be able to get $50,000 and I'm thinking that everything is forgivable, but it's not. What's the criteria?
Right. So what they're saying is that it's 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. And again, it is forgivable if you use at least 75% for your payroll expenses. How you calculate that, what your monthly payroll is, really depends on what kind of business you are. As you mentioned, if you're seasonal, it gets a little trickier. I'll tell you that myself as a seasonal employer too with an inn, I took 2019 payroll in total. I divided it by 9 months, which is the number of months that I'm actually in business. And that's the figure I used for my average.
Okay, Christy, what are you hearing from all the business that you're doing with the chamber? You have 700 members. What are people saying? What are they doing? Are they doing both these programs? Are they having difficulties?
Yeah, I would say most people are trying to apply to both programs. We've been encouraging everybody to apply to both programs. I think the number one question really is that seasonal component, and that's where we've been trying to get a lot more clarification. There's a lot of seasonal restaurants who are saying, okay, if I apply right now and get the 8-week PPP loan, but then I don't open, how do I actually use these funds? How do I make sure that I get the part that's forgiven? You know, is it worth even applying? So that's a lot of the questions we're getting is from the seasonal part, is making sure that they get the right information and the right tools for their business.
Megan, are you with us now? Do you want to jump in at all?
I am. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, we can hear
Yay!
I had to ditch the full-size computer and go phone.
Okay.
So I think, I'd echo a lot of what Christy just said about the seasonal folks, and what we're finding is just wild differentials in the interpretation bank to bank. So I think for small businesses, it is exceptionally important to make sure you're in touch with the bank that you're planning on borrowing from, instead of reading online resources and putting together an application and then going to the bank, because we deal largely with 5 different banks, and every single one of their applications and their interpretation of how this is going to work is different.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that even if you have applied already, especially for the PPP, do not go back and then try and reapply. It's just that when you actually start discussing things with your bank, you can go ahead and provide the adjustment, etc. They do not allow for you to apply twice.
Okay. Meg, since you're on here and we got you working, are you seeing most of your clients applying for both? Has anybody seen any relief yet?
No, I think a lot of our clients first applied for the EIDL, and I think are still waiting for those magic 72-hour funds to appear in their bank account. But most are applying for both. Almost all have some element of the unemployment benefit, but not many found an application for the family's first medical leave, just because they really had to lay people off before that even came into play.
Right. Okay. It looks like the live chat is up. I did get some questions on Facebook.
Christy has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. Sorry.
I just want, Megan, do you mind spending a couple minutes going over the expanded family paid medical leave, because I think that's something that we haven't touched on as a resource for businesses.
Sure. So that's largely going to be done through your payroll processor. And if you're doing your own payroll, you should really be setting up codes. And where this comes into play is if you have team members that are ill or are home caring for someone who is ill, or are unable to work because their children's school or childcare has been canceled, you are going to be required as an employer to provide this benefit. And the way that that works for small businesses is you will then get a tax credit on the back end. So you'll get credit once you can establish, how much of this you paid out. There are some like fast money sort of, you don't have to wait until the end of the quarter to apply for the money, because I know a lot of people just don't have cash to put out for this sort of thing. So it's really intended to expand paid time off, and is somewhat similar to what we would see in the state of Massachusetts coming in the future with our paid family medical leave benefits that just haven't kicked in yet.
Karen, Christy, anything on that before I go with some questions?
No, I think just that there is an exemption. Certainly, I know for small businesses, if for some reason they can prove that it is a direct hardship to be able to pay that out, that I think they can file for some kind of exemption. And again, Megan, you probably would know better than I on that. But I think if you can prove that you're going to go out of business trying to comply and do that, you can actually get a waiver if you're under 50 employees, 25 employees, something like that.
I haven't seen any waivers. I've only ever seen the expedited, instead of waiting for the credit, that there's like a fast track to recoup the dollars, because in theory,
Okay.
You should be net zero on it because the government's going to cover it.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, one of the questions I got today before this started was 1099 workers. Where do they fall in on all this? Self-employed.
Yeah, Megan, do you want to take that?
They're in a big old donut hole. Where they are going to find benefit, rather than focus on the negative and the places they're not, because that's a long list. Where they will find benefit is if you are an independent contractor. So you're a freelance graphic designer, or maybe you're a carpenter that works as an independent contractor for a construction company, you are going to be eligible, and Christy's probably got even better information than I do on this, under the payment protection loans.
Right.
Or sorry, paycheck protection loans. You're going to be able to apply on April 10th. So it's just a later start date. We haven't seen great clarity from all of the banks around how exactly this will work, but it's generally going to be something like your adjusted net profit from your 2019 tax returns. Some banks are even going to allow for a 2018 return and a 2019 P&L, like if you haven't had your taxes prepared yet. So it's some variation of net profit is how they're going to come up with what that benefit is to you.
So Megan, Karen, Christy, would you suggest self-employed, 1099 workers to start this process now and start working with your bank if it's SBA approved, and then be ready for the 10th?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this is it's always any of this, it's kind of a first come, first grab in some ways. There are limited funds, even though it's 350 billion. There's an awful lot of folks that are applying for this.
And the other thing,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, the other thing to note is if you do have 1099 contractors, you don't include them in your PPP application.
Correct, in your calculation for your payroll, correct.
Okay, I had another question. I'm a small business owner with no employees, and I don't take a paycheck. What program is there for me?
More likely than not, that you're going to fall under the paycheck protection loan, sole proprietor or single member LLC without employees. So that's the April 10th deadline. Okay. Although you may be able to apply for the EIDL as well.
Right, especially if you do have an LLC or some kind of corporate structure.
Okay. Is there any disadvantage to applying for both of these? Is there any group that shouldn't apply for something, right? What is the worst case scenario? You get denied? I know there's some fear on, well, if I put all this work in, is it going to put me in a certain box and be flagged?
No, I mean, so a couple things. First is the paycheck, the PPP is only open for applications until June 30th, whereas the EIDL is actually open for applications through December of this year. Also with the EIDL, you have up to 6 months to accept it after they tell you that you're approved. So, so you can go ahead and do what you're going to do with the PPP and then figure out what you need after that. I think the most important thing to do is really to sit down and take a look and project out your cash needs over the next 3 to 6 months and take a really hard look at what that cash flow looks like so that you understand how much you need to accept when they do get back to you and offer you something.
And I was just going to add, I know Karen mentioned it earlier, but the two programs have to be used for separate and separate expenses. So you can't use the PPP to cover maybe April and May payroll and also use the EIDL for those same payroll for those same employees. So you just have to make sure that you have really good bookkeeping and really good track of everything.
Exactly.
Work with your bookkeeper. Yep. So someone just wrote in, I'm a seasonal business, but paid my employees 1099 last year. Will PPP still work for me? I think you just addressed that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because you're not, the employer themselves would not be able to show then, they're going to show their payrolls, their average payroll is going to be just themselves potentially, I would imagine, if it's all 1099. So that might be one where the EIDL is going to make a lot more sense.
Is that right, Megan? The question before, small business owner with no employees and don't take a paycheck, is that the same thing?
It's not the same thing as what that question is. So there are completely legitimate reasons to, pay everybody that you worked with as a 1099. There's also some circumstances, and I'm not saying this is the case in this specific circumstance at all, but where business owners, because payroll can be expensive, choose to pay people as 1099 contractors. And this is a constant struggle, particularly within the trades community. And the real downside to that right now is if we skirted the rule and we paid people as 1099s, now they're not eligible for unemployment benefits. And when we go to apply for something like this paycheck protection loan, we're just not going to have the numbers to document and show it. And that's, sadly, the position that some folks are just going to be in.
Thank you for that. There's no other questions, comments up right now. Well, I'm sorry, Rebecca, if we are currently not open and only open during the summer, does that mean we cannot apply for PPP?
No, that means you definitely can apply for PPP.
Right.
As long as you rehire and or reinstate the employees to the level that you are saying is your standard, if you will, by June 30th, then you still would be eligible for that forgivable portion.
Is there any advice for the small businesses on unemployment? I know everyone's, furlough, unemployment, keep paying my staff. Like, I know it's gonna be different for everybody. Is there any criteria, anything on a website, any advice?
We've generally been telling people, if you're closed for business, this is what unemployment insurance is for. If you've laid off your folks, let them use that benefit. Now's not the time to try to get crafty about any of this. And unfortunately, there will be people that try to do that. But what's important for small businesses to understand is normally we view people claiming unemployment against our businesses a negative thing. However, in this time, what particularly here in the state of Massachusetts, they are doing is they are not affecting what's called your experience rate because you have claims against you at this point. So if you are not putting people back to work right away, this is a really good benefit to keep your people, you know, in groceries and hopefully their rent, at least part of it. And they are getting that additional federal benefit of $600 a week for a period of time. So really, as employers, one of the best things we can do is make sure that we're being responsive as claims come through to make sure that those get expedited and we get, you know, money in people's bank accounts so they can buy groceries and take care of the things they need to take care of as families. And if you're getting questionnaires for periods you've already filed, like if it's asking you for wage reporting for an employee for 2019, and you know you've done all of your wage reporting and remittance with the Department of Unemployment, that should be a signal that there's something wrong with the person's claim. Either they may have put the wrong name, the wrong social security number, or the wrong start and end dates for you as an employer, or you may have had their information wrong in the first place. And we're seeing a fair bit of that coming out in the wash. It is surprising the number of people that just struggle to get the right last name and social security number in there. So it is unfortunately a little bit of a hassle, but working with Department of Unemployment and the employee to get that straightened out as quickly as possible, because it is going to hold up their benefits. If you're the employee, I would take the information from your W-2 and use that when you're putting your claim in, even if maybe they've got an extra letter on the end of your last name or something like that. File with the information that's on the W-2. You can always sort out a typographical error later, but that will expedite the claim.
That's great advice, Megan.
And I was just going to add that we have had an expanded unemployment, so 1099 employees would be able to file. And right now that's not available or up and running yet, but it will be retroactive. So I know it's hard to sit tight, but as soon as it does open up, you will be able to receive the funds, I believe, back to February 27th, or it's either February 27th or January 27th. The other thing is the Mass DUA is doing virtual town halls. So if you guys have any questions about how to apply, they're fielding a lot of questions at the same time. And I've listened on a couple of them and found them to be very helpful.
Yeah, and employers, if you've laid people off, it's really helpful if you give them your proper business name, your legal business name, your EIN number, and their date of termination, and potentially their start and end dates of work for you, so that they don't have to go find that information, because that also will expedite the claim. Sometimes as employers, like, our legal business name isn't necessarily the name on the front of the store, and so an employee might not know to associate, you know, Fogged In Bookkeeping My Company with the name on their paycheck or something like that. So we can really sort of help people out by just giving that information out front.
Thank you, Megan. Small employer like myself, I don't have a lot of unemployment. Do I need to be looking to see if people are applying, even if they worked last year, so I can help expedite it? Or does it happen regardless of what I do as an employer?
Clean claims, which means all the information matches up to your filing, will go straight through, and they're not requiring questionnaires like they normally would. So those claims will go right through, and you'll get what's called a determination or a monetary determination notice. And those will be in your correspondence inboxes on your DUA web access, which is only available prior to 7:30 p.m. They actually close the website at night. So if you want to check on those, you have to plan to do it during the day. That's for real. And yeah, I would say, like, we've noticed a real like, normally you get an email communication when someone claims, and we're just not getting those emails for our clients. So we are suggesting that, you know, every 2 or 3 days, just pop in that DUA, look in the employer correspondence, and just check and see if any claims have come through that might need clarification or wage reporting from you.
Here, back to the PPP. Is it correct that PPP can be used to pay employees even if you are closed and they are not working? Christy?
I was on a call with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce with a couple of senators, and what they recommended is it was their intent to have businesses maintain that relationship and pay their employers even if they aren't working, to give, you know, cash into their the economy and to their employers. it was also meant to help businesses keep the employees on staff so that as soon as you can open, you would kind of be ready and able to. And that was just the recommendation from the US Senator as to kind of why they thought this program would work. I think Megan mentioned earlier, right now is also a good time to use the unemployment insurance if you need it. But the PPP program would allow you to pay full wages and benefits to your employees.
Anybody else on that? Before we move on? Okay. If you take the PPP as your primary tool and also take the EIDL, what is the interest rate to pay back the EIDL?
3.75%, I believe, for for-profits and 2.75% for nonprofits. And you do get to defer that loan for 1 year. You get to defer the EIDL longer than the PPP.
I think one thing just to do remember though, with the PPP, it does have a balloon payment. So it is only it's 2 years and they amortize it over 10 years. But at the end of 2 years, you do have to pay it all off. And that one's the 1%, whereas the EIDL, it can be paid off over 30 years. So depending on the size of what the loan is in your plans, that may impact the fact that the higher rate might actually still make sense.
And Megan or Karen, I think I heard today that if you got the PPP loan, you would have to roll your EIDL loan into that. So would that change any of those facts?
I know I saw something about the fact that that you do have to, I think you have to roll the EIDL into the PPP. And Megan, please jump in here because I'm still trying to follow all the different things. I know that if you get the 10,000 or whatever your advance is from the EIDL, that is deducted from what you can get from the PPP. And I do believe I saw something about the fact that one would have to be rolled into the other if you were approved for both.
Yeah, and my understanding of that is it comes down to an order of operations. So if I apply and close on my PPP loan and then later go try to apply for an EIDL loan, my forgiveness is going to be limited. And the forgiveness on the EIDL would have to get rolled into the PPP, but there potentially could be other funds available to me, like you had mentioned at the beginning of this, but I'd have to use it for other purposes and that kind of thing. And so I have to be careful of my order of operations. And again, I think it's, what you had said, Karen, before is really smart. You have to understand your cash flow. You don't want to go borrowing money you're never going to pay back, right? We want to get through this period, but we don't want to just put this mindset in where we hear a little bit of this of like, it's free money and everybody gets excited, because it's not free money. You are going to have some element of forgiveness, but there is a need to repay. And so if you're a business whose net profit is $1,000 a year, you don't want a $100,000 loan.
Right. And also, you should be clear, you cannot go after these loans to try and refinance other loans that you might have. So for example, the EIDL, if you have a 30-year your commercial property at 8%, you can't go back and try and get the EI just to refi that mortgage.
Thank you, Karen and Megan. Another question, if you accept a loan, how long are you committing to maintaining a comparable old level of payroll? Is it smarter to just cut your payroll and not hire seasonal people, et cetera?
And they're referring to the PPP, I assume?
I would think so, if they threw in payroll.
And Megan, please feel free to jump in here too.
So on the PPP, you've got to maintain this payroll. It's for an 8-week window after the loan is granted. So for a lot of people, that's probably going to be May and June. but it has to end June 30th. So you've got to squeeze in 8 weeks somewhere. So a lot of this is going to come down to how fast our banks can process these loans.
Is that true though? I know that you have to apply by June 30th, but it was my understanding as long as you rehired someone by June 30th, that the 8 weeks potentially, if you're not approved until the beginning of June, that those 8 weeks could potentially be then June and July.
Christy, do you have other clarification on that? My understanding is that you could do a look back on your May and June activity, but that the 8 week period is supposed to be within that window. But I could totally stand corrected on that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that's something that we can look into and get clarification on. I too had heard you could look back, so you could, if you get approved, say May 1st, you could use the funds for April payroll. Again, kind of, it can be an 8 week period, but that I think we need to clarify.
Right, especially if you have to rehire, and if your payroll was already not there because you weren't open. I think, as you all can see, there's a lot of questions still about this.
I think it's going to be a tough fit for some seasonal employers for sure.
Yeah, as you were talking about this, someone texted me because they were having problems. They're a seasonal business, and same thing. The banks can't answer this. Do I have until June 30th to start paying people?
Right.
As in, can I start tracking the 8 weeks of payroll starting June 1st through July 30th? That would show the government and the bank 8 weeks of payroll. This is pretty much the same thing you were just addressing, right?
I think so.
So if Megan doesn't know and the banks don't know.
Yeah, and I think whatever that period is, like what your tax filing basis, if you're cash or accrual, is sort of dictating your loan application reporting periods and so on. So I think it'll come down to a little bit of discretion on behalf of the SBA lender about accounting basis, frankly, and those kind of things, because I think there's they've got some leniency in there.
Thank you. Next question. As a seasonal business owner, is it better to continue paying my current staff, covering their expenses with the PPP, or advise them to apply for unemployment? I know we've kind of touched on this, but it's all confusing.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I think this is where it gets very tricky, and every business is different, and every business's relationship with their employees and their cash basis and where they are is different. So I think, we always recommend having a thorough discussion with your bank, with your accountant, bookkeeper, and legal, if you have that as well, especially HR legal, to talk through this and really run the numbers as well and understand what's going to be best. In some cases, there's hard choices, I think, because it might be better for the business and yet not as great for the employees right at that moment. But then on the flip side, if your business now is that really great for employees anyway. So, a lot of questions there.
I also think there's an element here, and I agree wholeheartily with Karen, we've done a lot of side-by-side comparisons. You make the spreadsheet both ways and see how it works out, right? Run your numbers. But I think there's also elements in here of what percentage of your workforce is seasonal visa employees that has to be taken into consideration, because we know that sort of factors into your PPP loan application. If those workers are not able to come this summer, what does that mean to your business? And do you really need to secure your local folks, your college students, your folks that are not here on visas early? And that's got to sort of be a part of the projection that is not monetary.
Thank you for that. It sounds like we need to do this at least once a week, or somebody does, or we all need some kind of EIDL PPP therapist or consultant that we can talk to on a daily basis.
Yes, and I just wanted
So
to,
why count as a therapist?
I just wanted to add that we're talking a lot about small business eligibility, and nonprofits, 501c3s are eligible for a lot of these programs. The other C3s, such as C4, C5, C6, are not. So definitely be in touch with, your accountant and your banker and legal and everything to see what you are eligible to apply for.
Another question, with the PPP, if we follow the guidelines and use 75% for payroll, 25% utilities, is it 100% forgivable, or is it dependent on the bank? I think we asked this in the very beginning, I think.
So you have
Then
to,
it should be. But Megan, you jump in if you know something.
so it's a little bit of a circular reference math thing, because you've got to get your 75% of the loan isn't entirely accurate, because you have to get your staffing levels to meet or exceed the number that they're trying to hit at. So you may have to use more than 75% of the loan, in some circumstances. That would be unusual, but it's possible, depending on sort of where your various funding requirements are. But I couldn't think of a circumstance, and well, I guess you could, if you had really, really high rent that fell within 25% and your employment numbers worked out right. Yeah, you could have 100% forgiveness, but I think we're going to see that as the exception to the rule.
Is there anything else that we need to cover? I don't have any more questions right now. Any other loans, any other thing with unemployment, anything else small businesses need to know?
One thing I did mention is if you did apply for the EIDL early on, right in the beginning, and it was a much longer application, they came out with a more streamlined one last week. They are asking everybody to reapply using that form. Number one, because that's the only way you can get the advance. And number two, they are just asking everybody to go through that. I think maybe they were asking for some different information. You still supposedly keep your place in line. So if you were the second person in the world to apply back with the old form, in theory with this, you still have your place as number two. But I would definitely make sure you go back, take that link and fill out that streamlined application.
Megan, did you have anything?
Yeah, I would say that, I think there's a lot about this entire situation that is just overwhelming to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in business finance, on a good day, under normal circumstances, sometimes we want to ostrich this and put our head in the sand and not really look at the stack of bills or the loan that's coming due or the finance component. And what I have to say on that is really knowing how deep the hole is, or knowing what the situation is, can be a relief. And now is probably not the time, as long as you can, like within the realm of your own mental health and well-being, get a hold of your numbers, keep up with your bookkeeping, understand what that debt load is. You're dealing with an informed decision-making process, and you've got your hands around what's really happening. Because a lot of times our perception of how good or how bad something is very tied to our emotions and not to statistical data. And right now, statistical data is your friend. And if you're working with a bookkeeper and you're like, I just can't afford to pay somebody right now, I know we're extending much more generous terms to our clients. Not everybody may be able to afford to do that, but you can ask. You can maybe, do this in a more basic way, whether it be in Excel or even pen and paper in the meantime, but don't walk away from this stuff, because what's going to happen is at some point you're going to need this information. And if you let it get really far behind, it's going to be that much bigger of a task, and it's going to all of a sudden be an emergency.
Thank you, Megan. Christy, did you have something?
Oh, just a general comment that I know everybody is feeling that everything's changing day by day and feeling a little bit frustrated that maybe the banks don't know or we don't know. And, you know, we're all doing the best that we can and keep up to date. I know Fogged In Bookkeeping has a great blog. I've been watching everything that Megan posts, all those updates. The Chamber has a good resource page. Rogers Gray has a great resource page. So, and I know there's a lot of reading, and this Q&A is a lot faster and quicker to get your questions, but there are a lot of resources out there, and we're all trying to figure it out at the same time. And as soon as we have updates, we'll get them through to you.
My wife, who's in the nonprofit world, says her go-to is the Chamber. It's been the easiest thing to understand and pull all her questions that she has for her and her board and her employees. The Chamber site is her go-to. So you guys have done a really great job, Christy.
Thank you. I got to give credit to Karen. She's created a really great fact sheet. It's right at the top of our website. Good FAQ between the two programs and which one you might want to apply for.
I would also just like to put a plug in, even though the website's not ready yet, we will make a but we are launching a website that's called Keep the Rock Solid. As part of that, it's going to be all kinds of resources for small business owners, as well as a place where people who want to donate in order to help business owners. So it's going to be a portal for kind of all things giving and getting. We hope to have that available by the end of this week to start, so we will let you all know about that. But please do keep your eyes open for that. I think it's going to be a great resource for everyone as well.
What was the name of that? You jumped in and out. I couldn't catch it.
I'm sorry. Keep the Rock Solid.
Okay. Keep the Rock Solid.
Yes.
Anything else out there that small business need to be aware of? If there's one or two places, I don't love to read. I don't love going to a website and trying to figure everything out. I need to talk and listen. But if I was going to the site, Christy, to the Chamber, what webinar, what do I really need to focus on? What should I read?
I personally think the Rogers Gray webinar, it's every Friday at 10 a.m. and they've been updating based on what regulations have gone through or updated information. They've had information on the it's FFCRA, it's the expanded medical leave information. And then they also have been focused on the PPP and EIDL loans. And I found that to be, it's about an hour and 15 minutes every Friday. I log in and listen to those updates. And then they also have them on their website. So if you missed it, you could go back and listen.
How much is it? I'm sorry, go ahead, Megan.
Oh, and I was just going to add, and Christy saying Rogers and Gray made me think of it. You know, I think a lot of business owners have sort of reached out to their insurance companies to investigate the idea of business interruption insurance. And the majority of brokers are going to come back and say no, but we are receiving advice from some larger companies like Eastern Insurance that are telling their client base to put in a claim, even if you anticipate that it will be denied, because if it becomes case law in the future, or if there is a shift as this shakes out, if you put in a claim, even if it was denied, you may have recourse to go back. But if you wait too long, you may be outside the claim window. So this would be considered, like, you can look within your policy documents around biological contamination, which doesn't necessarily have to be fire or physical damage to your building. And so they are feeling that there may be some recourse in the future. So that's a conversation to have with your insurance company.
And Christy, for the Rogers Gray webinar, if you just go to their website, all that information's there, previous ones, future ones. You said Friday at 10 a.m.
Yes, and I'll post the link to this in the chat.
Okay. I did see one other question from Nicole. If you are a single employer LLC at this time, but had another employee in the fall, would you just figure out 100% of your own payroll costs now instead of averaging out using former employees?
So no. So if you had an employee back last fall, you would do the 2019 or the last 4-quarter look back period, including that employee, and it actually would make you eligible to apply now instead of on April 10th. As long as you paid that person on payroll and not as an independent contractor.
I got a text question for somebody it's not working for him over here. Can you ask if there is a direct connect phone number to ask questions to the SBA? They're putting a lot of the liability on the banks to guarantee the loans. Do you have that secret number, Megan?
Right? If I had that. And actually, if I had that, it wouldn't do me a lot of good, because ultimately the gatekeeper to the loan ends up being my bank. And so it's my bank's interpretation of how this is going to apply that ultimately dictates how this is going to work. We're seeing some banks that the way that they're applying this is wildly different than any documentation from the Treasury and the SBA, and their customers are just at their whim. I don't even want to say the name of the bank because I don't want to be disparaging to anybody, but we're seeing like some very large lenders that are taking advice that was maybe applicable 3 weeks ago, but as of last night's update from the Treasury, or even things from a week ago, is completely off base, and their customers just are at that whim. So I think really the relationship with your banker, your lender, is going to be what dictates how this works for you.
This texter also said, they're just trying to get an answer so they can, they start the payroll now or later. And so, yeah, that's their understanding of what you just said, Megan. So thank you. I love this real time connection. It's nice. All right, we've been about 45 minutes. That was our goal, to try to keep this not too long, but long enough to get some good answers. Is there anything else in closing anybody wants to throw out there?
I was just going to add, I know Karen and I have received the #1 question the past 2 days is kind of when will we hear a response? And so Karen, do you want to answer that question?
And once again, if I had the answer to that one, I would be a millionaire. What we've been told again is that for the EIDL, when you apply, you will get a confirmation. I've experienced that myself. We are supposed to be getting the advance funds supposedly in about 3 to 5 days after applying. I will tell you that I reapplied last week using that shorter form that I was supposed to. As of today, I don't see any wonderful deposits in my bank account. So I'll keep monitoring that. Be happy to share if that does change. And the PPP, I think the banks are so overwhelmed. Gosh, I would love to be able to have a banker on this call at some point in the future so that they can talk to us about what they expect.
Megan, anything as we get closing here?
The only other thing that I would add that's more about sort of, taking good care of our employees when we can is that in these circumstances, we are allowed to give money to our employees as non-taxable wages for the purpose of keeping them afloat through a disaster or emergency, as long as those funds are used for reasonable expenses. So maybe that's for childcare. I know that we personally have given some of our employees that have children at home some long leash with our Amazon account, because keeping their kids busy means keeping them working for us, and things like that. So you want to check with your tax preparer about how that's applicable to you, but it is possible. It goes through as non-taxable wages to the employee, which means they're not going to pay income tax on it on their W-2 and such. You're not going to be responsible for including that in your retirement contributions and that kind of thing. So it can really be mutually beneficial if you've got the cash on hand and if you're able to support your employees in that way. Sometimes that can be a really nice gesture, if nothing else.
Thank you, Megan. So I want to thank everybody for doing this and taking time out of your busy day to help educate everyone. This is going to be posted on YouTube later. So if you know somebody who would really benefit from listening to this, you can send them the link. You can put it on any social media account, throw it on Facebook, send it to them. It'll be edited. Links will be put in. And I think it's going to be a great resource for everyone. And maybe we'll do it again next week. So I want to say thank you to Christy and Karen from the Chamber. You guys are doing an amazing job. And Megan, you are my go-to person on just about everything. So I hope that you are drinking a lot of coffee and handling it well.
We're trying, and we have our Handlebar Mayor Hansen Christmas mugs out. And thank you for putting this together. Really informational.
My pleasure. It's been really very my knowledge is higher every time I do this, and I can make better decisions. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, NCTV 18. They did this in about 18 hours. We came up with this yesterday afternoon, this idea, and they got it all together. So thank you.
Amazing, guys.